Did I get enough? Yeah, there we go. There we go. Get everybody over here? Did I miss anybody? Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you all for coming. This is Timelords and Timelines. I'm Rachel Evans, Metadata Services Librarian at UGA Law Library. This is Sharon Bradley, our Special Collections Librarian. And this is Eleanor Lanier, our Associate Dean for Clinical and Experiential Learning. The idea for this session came from the fact that we, the three of us together separately, along with several other colleagues at UGA Law Library, have been using various web applications to create timelines for a lot of different purposes. And so we just wanted to share some of the tools that we've been using, some of the different events and sort of places that we've put timelines, and how, to sort of wrap the presentation up at the end, how we've been able to use them again and again and sort of recycle and repeat, and how the type of platform that you choose to build a timeline can help you, sort of insert it into different ways and different purposes, like in the classroom, or for promotion of your library's materials, or even for big events, which is, some of those specifics the different panelists will be talking about as we go through. So, the next one. I must admit, I'm not actually a Doctor Who fan. I've never seen Doctor Who. I know. I gotta give total credit for the idea for the title of this presentation to Sharon. So,
I was knitting a scarf, Tom Baker's scarf. I got this far and had to say it wasn't going to make it to the 6 yards that it is. Thoughts were there.
I am a time travel fan, on the whole. So there's some other time travel mythology and sci-fi worked into this presentation as well. But for the purposes of this presentation, I did my own tiny bit of research on what a Time Lord is, and I thought, well, that really does sound like a librarian. Achieved a level of technology indistinguishable from magic. I thought that's going to fit everybody in this audience. So, what to expect from your time travelers? So first, Sharon is coming at this a little bit more from the teaching side of things, and she's going to talk about why this could be useful for legal instruction specifically. Then we're going to poll the audience and ask a handful of questions, seeing what all of you have been, if you've used timelines before or not, and if you are, what platforms you're using. Hopefully, maybe some of them are the ones that we'll talk about. And also, hopefully, some of them are ones you haven't used before, or if you've used it, you haven't used it to create a timeline. And we can share with you how we've done that. And then we can also, we'll each talk about the specific purposes for why we've used it, the initial purpose, what spurred making a timeline, why that particular tool for creating it, and then, again, at the end, how we've collaborated on it and how we plan to reuse and reuse it so that we can continue to get more mileage out of these projects. So,
yes, obviously there need to be some pedagogical reasons. Dr. Yearwood touched on that yesterday, that while we're the kind of people that sort of love bright, shiny things for the love of bright, shiny things, that in order to sort of justify the time or the money we might spend on these things, that we do need to bring it back to the teaching component as well. So there are some genuine pedagogical reasons that timelines might be useful. But for me, thinking about legal research instruction, and I was thinking how or why you might even incorporate them into classroom presentations. So what about a timeline that traces the development of very complex legal concepts like searches and seizures, so that the students kind of understand the history of some of these concepts, just any concept really, and how it ended up where it is today and putting it in a timeline form for them. I also thought about the notion about having students maybe develop their own timelines, again, for a complex area of law, as an active learning technique, and that again could help them conceptualize, but also appealing to those students with maybe some different learning styles as well. Because there's quite a visual component that goes along with timelines. Timelines are also helpful with organizing events and information itself. For instance, if any of you who have practiced law before, while being a librarian or as a faculty member as well, that cases can actually go on for years. And so perhaps a timeline might be something that could be used or even talked about maybe in a clinical setting, that the students develop a timeline of an ongoing case when it has to be handed off to somebody else. And most of these applications allow you to attach documents, or at least put the links if you've got the documents online somewhere as well. So creating a timeline as part of an ongoing case could be very useful 5, 10 years down the road when the case is still proceeding as well. And also, I'm going to try this, I think, in research this fall, is again that notion of trying to appeal to students in a different way, of a timeline, just sort of tracking their research and seeing if that might not help them as well. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can work these sorts of things in. I also thought about perhaps the notion of creating timelines, again, for a case that's an ongoing situation, so tracking just the legal developments, but also from a trial setting, tracking events that happened as a case goes along as a way of helping a jury. Now the question there is that something that you can get admitted into court? But that's perhaps another technique to use with students in training them in getting evidence or getting information admitted in a courtroom setting as well. They've created the timeline. So I think there's a lot of applications in training and teaching, but also in following cases as well.
And at this point, we want to break it up a little bit. We would love for you, many of you have your computers. There's 3 ways that you can join this poll that we have live right now. So before I switch over and show the live polling results, the first question is going to be, how have you used timelines? And then I'll ask what platforms you've used, if you've used them. So I'll give you a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions about how to log on. I've got the app on my phone. I see some of the responses coming in right now. And maybe this is a good moment to say, again, we've used them in for a variety of reasons. We've used them for displays, we've used them for handouts, presentations like the one we're giving now, in live event scenarios, and that's actually the latest one that we've done was a big event where we wanted people who were coming to the event to interact with the timeline. So that's the one of the ones we'll be sharing about in a moment. And as these are coming in, it looks like people have already logged on, so I'm going to switch off of that. Let's go to the next one. There we go.
And just even hearing, while you're pulling those up, just even hearing Sharon's presentation got me up to think of 2 things that I'm not doing that I could use timelines for in both a skills class and in a clinic class. And so that was kind of fun.
Being inspirational, that is my goal.
There you go. Done and done on this Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Just trying to get those to show up right away for you, but let's make sure that we have these up and running so people can see them. Let's do full screen.
Did you do a poll on their favorite Timelord?
That would be at the end, yes. Well, not their favorite Timelord. Maybe we should
Oh.
do an informal poll question for that. I should have thought about that. So it looks like we've got 38% have used them in class in some way, slides, handouts. Oh, 36. Now we've got some people using them in a blog and online, and then also for print materials. So this is wonderful. The next one that I want to open up for you is going to be what you've used. So if you can take a moment to let us know which ones you've used, or if there's another one. I see some other, and so I would love to hear from some people in the audience. What are the other platforms that you've used other than the ones that the four that we're going to be talking about? Anybody feel like sharing? Yeah.
Canva.
Awesome. That one's very similar to Piktochart. I've seen lots of people use that one as well. Yeah.
Just Google Slides.
Google Slides.
Case Fleet, which is not cheap, but a lot of different firms are using it. And they let me play around in it for about 3 months because I asked for an academic purpose.
But it was designed for law firms?
It's designed for firms to handle their evidence over the course of their case. So they're able to put in, date of the murder, date this was found, date that happened, when they're going to court, and what files they need to take with them as well. So it's a case management system that provides a timeline of wrapping options.
Very cool. Anyone else? Yeah?
Time Map it's now sold by Lexis, free to law schools, litigation. Has a nice feature in that it gives you proportional spaces between events. So you can see easily what happened a long time ago, what happened right up against each other.
Very cool. And yours?
Just Microsoft Smart Art, right? Sometimes you just need quick and easy.
Right.
Get her done.
Yeah.
I'll be the one that admits to using paper.
Paper. That's a great one too. So I've even gone as far as sometimes making a timeline, a method that I would not suggest necessarily following if you're in a time crunch, but doing it by hand and then turning those outlines into like a nice image and pulling that into like Photoshop or something. So I think that the great way to talk about timelines is really you can use anything to make them, right? Any software or non-software will lend itself well to making a timeline. It's just whatever you prefer. And that's a great way for us to get into the different options that we want to share with you today. So let's, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Go away. Go back. Sorry about that. Of course, it's going to be funnier. There we go. All right.
See, we've gone back in time.
We've gone back in time already. So the first one I want to talk about, Prezi. This is not new to anyone. It's one of my favorites to use. I used to really love using Prezi at first to take to conferences like this. I liked that it got you a little bit outside the box. I loved that I wasn't limited when I started thinking about a presentation, and this comes into play when I'm thinking about creating a timeline, that I don't have all the information at first. Maybe it's a process that I'm going through, and making it sometimes is a part of the finding process. So I don't know what's going to fall between a couple of years, and I'm figuring that out. And Prezi is a great place where you've got that open canvas, and you can just go and start plugging away at things, and as you get them, you can later put them into the right order of events. And up here in the top left corner of the slide, just to compare the two, is an example of Piktochart with the exact same information and timeline. So the Prezi, for this particular one, I used as a presentation that I gave at a couple of conferences and then later turned into like a webinar. And then the Piktochart version in the top left is the one that I took the information that I had used, that I had found from the Prezi version, and turned it into a handout. And so at that point, it was a lot easier to use a different platform that was meant for print once I had things in order already. But it would have been a lot more difficult doing it for a handout at first without having things in the right order. So that's just a part of my process.
Is Prezi like still a thing anymore? Isn't it sort of dying?
What do you guys think?
Dying or still a thing?
It depends.
It depends.
The legal answer, it depends.
Depends on the context, I think, too. I myself have strayed away from using Prezi as much as I used to for the purposes of, it's not, I don't feel like it's as reliable when I go to a conference. But I do just love the fact that there are things out there where you can start with a completely blank canvas, and that can be a part of your process, a part of your sort of research process. So that's one of the benefits of it, that since it's not designed to be a timeline material, it doesn't force you into this linear timeline that you may not have at first. The others that we'll look at, you're really going to need some of the answers up front, and Sharon will talk about that in a minute. Like for time toast.
A big part of my job is sort of preserving the history of the school. And so I do spend a fair amount of time looking at people who are kind of important figures within the law school and kind of dealing with their materials and what we may have. One of them being Edith House, who was the first woman to graduate from the School of Law. But I've done a number of them over the years. If some deceased professors, we come into possession of some materials that belong to people. So one of my ways of, oftentimes when you get things donated, you have to do something with them. The family, the people that donate those things to you do expect there to be some product. So for me, it's important in my job to make a product. And I have found that I'm a LibGuides fiend. I'm obsessed with LibGuides, and so I use that as my tool to create my homage to deceased faculty members or ancestors of donors and alumni and things like that as well. So, and really going to a lot of work of digitizing whatever materials might be there. But part of the process that I go through for most of those tributes is including a time element within them. And Rachel's going to show you at least one of our live ones in a few minutes, I think. So I go to the trouble of setting up the time span with the people that I'm doing these LibGuides for. So for me, Rachel was talking about kind of using Prezi and putting the pieces together. My way of working is all of this stuff goes into the LibGuide. That's made perfect with my dates and my photos and my links and all of that. Then looking at timelining it. So I'm kind of working a little bit reverse way of doing that. The point you made about making those little differences smaller, one of the things I might suggest, because not all of the timelines have that feature where you can have 50 years span next to each other. So one of the things that I would think about or suggest doing is if you are making a timeline, and the example I made in an article that Rachel and I wrote was that Albert Einstein, his first great paper came out in 1905. And so that was really the start of his career. But he was born a number of years before that. But I'm not going to start with the year he was born. I'm probably going to start with 1905. But as part of the text, when I talk about what he did in 1905, publishing his theory of general relativity, and by the way, he was born in 18 whatever in some city. So kind of think about the important events in a timeline, and then using the text to maybe add the additional information about where he was born, or maybe a little bit down the road he got married, got divorced, whatever you think is important, but not necessarily making those date points within the timeline, because you end up with sometimes these gaps that don't make a lot of sense. So that would be my suggestion in doing the timeline. So the Edith House one, because she was an important figure in our law school, so we embedded that. And for someone who is maybe just thinking about getting started with timelines, definitely Time Toast is probably the easiest one to use. So if you haven't tried them, it's a good place to start, and it works well to embed within LibGuides we've embedded in other areas as well.
I will say too, and I do this a lot when we're trying to get, as I said earlier, a little more mileage out of some of our timelines that we've created. Sometimes the embed, even though it embeds well, maybe you want people to interact with it, but it can be distracting for the blog post, for example. So it is not directly embedded into the blog post, but we'll do a full screen, like a full-size screen capture, and use that image as the linking off point where you would click and it would take you to the full timeline so that somebody could experience it that way. So there's, as you've seen, like there's multiple ways that you can use this, not just in your guide, but in your social media or your blog, or link to it from an article, or take a nice image and use that as a part of a print display. So we hope that all these different ways, you know, it all depends on context, and it all depends on what way you really want to use it for. But that's one thing that I love to do, is to take a picture of it and pull it in. If I just can't get it to work quite right or to fit within the dimensions of a certain platform, I'll just use an image, and then I can link to the full experience for people. And sometimes that's better, and it'll load faster. So that's good for that user experience too. So get back to the next one, and this is where I want to bring Ellie in to talk about this event. So Tiki Taki is the latest one that I've used. I only started using it earlier this year, and when the clinics were looking at a big celebration that they were having, and we started talking about a timeline, and the whole point was to be able to engage people at the event, and we thought, well, we need something that'll be really cool, full screen, on our big touch screen, and we want to make that experience exciting, but we also want it to be full of, you know, information, photos and all of that. So that's where we ended up with Tiki Taki, and I think a big part of getting us to use this one, because this is one of them that we're not using a free account, we do have a paid account, and making the argument for it being worthwhile had a lot to do with the administration and them feeling like it was beneficial. It was not just going to be useful for this event, but moving forward. So I'll let her do a little bit of talking about that as well.
Okay, so I get to talk about the big party celebration, and this was the coolest thing to do, be able to do it as a collaboration between our clinical faculty and the law library. And so what we really wanted to do was figure out a way to bring people back, to have them post memories, and part of my job, kind of like Sharon in a different sense, is to try and just tell the story of clinics. And so I'm always thinking about how can we explain the value of clinical legal education. And this celebration we celebrated the 50th anniversary of our first law clinic this past year. And so this timeline was part of our big kind of reunion where we asked people who had participated in clinics in the past to come back for the party. And then we also wanted to engage them with memories of and kind of reflections on what either just something they were proud about, like I handled the case by myself while I was still in law school, and got charges dropped for someone, or we successfully changed a statute through my work with the Attorney General's office, or whatever it was. So it could be a memory, or it could be just a reflection, or this one gave us the opportunity to do multimedia. So you see we had kind of like a StoryCorps booth, and some of the people we brought back all the former directors of clinics from the very beginning who were still alive. And this was fun because you can see up in the right-hand corner they were looking at some old pictures. And Sharon and others in the library found like this archival stuff from the late 60s, and some of the folks, had great different hair and glasses back then, and they were still there, and so they're looking at, oh, look at me, when I still had hair, and so it just had lots of different components. So this one allowed for people to add oral content, and I went and brought a recorder and met with the director of the first clinic who wasn't able to attend, but I got to get some photos from him of the first building, which was this ramshackle building, and he talked about, just how on a dime they had, things stuffed in the cracks because it was so cold and damp, and what that experience was like. And so we were able to have photos and recordings and then interact with it on a touch screen. So people could go say, okay, what happened when I was in law school in 1986 or whatever. They could touch and see, and they went back through the Advocate and pulled articles from that. And it was just a super fun thing. It really got people to engage, and we continue to post things. So that's been a nice thing too, so people can continue to post memories. The big thing that I got from my dean was you have to curate it. You can't just let someone post something because the next thing you know, we're gonna be in above the law because somebody talked about how drunk they got before the bar exam, or something like that. So that would be one caution, was that we needed to just scroll through. Oh, there's Alan. Oh. He doesn't have as much hair anymore, and he just retired this past year. And we all just loved that picture because he was in the clinic when he was in law school, and then he was the director for about 25 years. But it was just super fun, and also it's not a static thing. I think that's the other important point, is that we really viewed it as a dynamic. We went back and loaded all this stuff, but hopefully moving forward, we can continue to collect it, and then, down the road, think of all those different types, and you can see that this software lets you say whether it's a tag, whether it was a memory, whether it came from a news story, whether it came from our law school magazine, or what the source was, and then just pull on. Oh, and she's the director of our civil clinics now, so this alum, and there's the picture of her graduating, and she got to talk about what it meant to her and how her clinical experience inspired her law career. And so for me, that's so much richer than just having a panel where people got up and talked, and it also enabled so many others to participate in it, even those who, for whatever reason, weren't able to attend that day. So.
The other fun thing about this one, it wasn't just fun for the people that were attending, getting to see themselves and getting to see their own memories that they had contributed. It was a jumping off point with having the booths to record. This is actually one of the little handheld recorders. It's super simple. It's not amazing quality, but it's more than adequate for the purpose of this event. And the simpler, the better, right? You can just have it in a room. We had some release forms, and we could have this going simultaneously, so people were able to interact with it. They're like, that's so cool, I want to give mine. And several people would walk into the booth then and give their story. And so we have these ready. There's actually a couple on here that I still need to pull off from the event and include them in the timeline. One reason that I went with Tiki Taki for this and not some of the others wasn't just because it looked kind of slick and it was going to be neat with an interactive, big touch screen where people could actually walk up to it and swipe. It was really, people enjoy being able to do that. But it was also because it allows for multimedia, and that's a tough one, right? I mean, Prezi, that's an option where it's not really meant to be a timeline, so there's other issues with using it for this purpose, but at least you can embed videos. I have not been able to embed any videos in TimeToast. Now, if we're going to use TimeToast for the purposes of putting into a guide, we don't normally need it for videos. But for this purpose, we knew and we hoped that we wouldn't just have a little bit of audio and video coming into this project, but that it would, in turn, draw in more audio commentary, and maybe we would end up adding more videos over time. Maybe even a video from the event itself would be at the tail end of this timeline, right? So we wanted it to support all the formats. And that was a great thing about Tiki Taki that I haven't been able to find in some other platforms that I've used. So it was a really great one. And also, it's feeding content into the library. So a lot of this content came from our institutional repository. We were able to pull things like articles from alumni magazines, just articles that some of the faculty had published, news items, announcements of people coming and going from the faculty over the years. And some of the content that we got, like photos, are things that we didn't otherwise have, like a photo of the first clinic building. We didn't have that in our archives, but now we do because of the project. So that photo will go back into the repository. So it creates this sort of cyclical thing that is not just helping the institution, but us as librarians are getting excited about the extra content we have. Like, oh, we found a new photo, you know.
An endless time vortex, so we never stop spinning.
Right.
And I do want to mention though, not only were the alums who came in kind of, oh, there's us, and, you know, but the current students were fascinated. They loved, particularly they loved seeing their professors from the 70s and 80s. And so it was really one of those projects that crossed so many lines and so many people, and people were still chattering about it, you know, weeks later. And so it was mainly for Rachel a lot of work. But again, it's that notion that there's so many people were impacted by it. And you don't always get that, right? Sometimes you spend a lot of time on a project and not that many people kind of benefit from it. So this was definitely one that was probably had a good return on investment, just because of the current students were just like tickled to death to see people.
And before you move on, just one last thing, and I see we have a question, but the other thing for me that was quite daunting, because not only am I doing the associate dean job here for a little while, and I decided that I wanted to mark this anniversary as close as I could because I thought that was pretty cool. It was totally daunting. They handed me, when I said I want to do this, they handed me a book, a history book of the law school, and that had, you know, maybe a few pages about clinics, but I had no idea. And now it's all there. So maybe 50 years from now, and we kind of said, and it's for mapping the future, you know, that's an aspect of it. It's not just where we've been, but that this is just this point in time, and now we have it, and we can kind of continue to add, and maybe the cyborg robot or zombie who's going to be the associate dean 50 years from now won't have, you know, will have this record and won't have to kind of recreate it from scratch.
And the last one, we had a question. Let me go back.
Yeah, so that's actually, you're kind of hitting on my question, which is, what if Tiki-Taki goes away? So in terms of exporting, you know, this timeline or the content that's within it for archival purposes, for recreating for the next, you know, version or whatever.
Right. I have not tried that yet.
Do it when we get that, 'cause
Right.
that archival, but that's my, like, fear.
Right. So this is definitely, like I said, the newest one that we've tried, and this event snuck up on us quite a lot. And just gathering the information and assembling the timeline with the stuff that we had at first was, lots of people were feeding me the stuff, and I did the doing of putting it together, and Ellie was doing a lot of the gathering things from people. And I will say that we received information in a lot of different formats, and if that is not possible, hopefully it is. Tiki-Taki is really cool. Perhaps when I go in and I click, there's a way for me to very effortlessly export this in a beautiful way. I did love that should it export very well, I was able to already categorize different types of content. So that's something else that I haven't been able to do in some of these other products. There isn't a way, if there's a way you could say this is a memory or this is a journal article, but as far as the system recognizing it and visually seeing, look at all those Advocate magazine articles, look at all the photos, look at all the audio memories, it does that very well. And the librarian in me really liked that I was able to color code and categorize. And that only happened actually as an afterthought. As content started, you know, coming in really quickly and the event was coming up on us, it was like, well, we really got to put this together. But there's so much. How do I kind of sift and organize it and hopefully make it easier for that future situation where I need to pull it back out again? But I would say if I can't do that, then hopefully I've kept records well enough from pulling it in and sort of organizing it just on my own end before it becomes a timeline.
And I have a file folder that's Law Clinics at 50 that has everything that kind of got dumped in. I don't know, obviously it wouldn't look like this, but
Right.
we've at
We
least
do
got
have
it
it
to
in a
pass
variety of
along.
forms, so hopefully there's a good way to do that. I would say that if any of these programs that we've talked about could do it, it would be Tiki-Taki. It seems to be, things are changing pretty quickly. Just in the time that I began this timeline, which would have been late February of this year, to now, I went back in and there's a new feature to make a 3D timeline, and I was like, how did I not know that? I missed the boat on that. So that may be one of my next projects as well, not just pulling stuff out, but turning it into a 3D one. Yeah.
So the user interface is obviously fairly robust, but how easy is it to just open it and get started?
Well, it's not very. I will also say, although it's my favorite as far as it being very robust, it can handle a lot, it can handle lots of formats, it obviously works well for a lot of different contexts instead of just a couple like we've seen with some other products. Going in and putting in the information is frustrating for me. The space that it gives you to work with, there's a lot of space on the screen and attention to the timeline itself, and the entry point where you're pasting something in is very small with a tiny window, and I can show you when we get to the end. We would love to do a demo, because I think we'll have time to just show you what that looks like on the back end. And so this is the one that I would not, if you've never done a timeline before, I don't recommend you starting with this. It's just so tiny to work in. And it can be really frustrating to have, when you're pasting in, as some of our examples had very long-winded memories that people gave us, right? You need to do that editing
I think the
before you
term
paste
is
it in.
rich.
Rich. Very rich content. They're wonderful memories, but you really, once you paste it in there, the way that it wraps the text, it's so tiny and it's impossible to do any editing. So I did find that very frustrating, being the person that's entering the data.
But note to self, for those collecting, you could say, give us your headline, and then you could even do a kind of a cool, from my perspective, a cool content analysis about competencies that alums report they were using. I mean, I think, so part of that is not tiki-taki. Part of that is me not really clearly setting the parameters when I ask for memory.
Yeah, we went into this particular project not knowing what we were going to get, thinking we'll be lucky if we get a couple photos. We'll be lucky if one person visits the memory booth and gives us a recording, but we had several. So we've got a lot. It turned out better than we could have hoped. As far as the content goes. And that, if we were to do this next time around, we may put limits on if there's a space. One of the options that we did to gather content was to create a web form in our website. That our web team did that for us. And so that web form, we had a very open-ended, there was not a limit on the amount of text that somebody could put in to type their memory. And moving forward, were we to do this over again, we might say limit, we might put a word limit, so that we don't have that issue and can kind of control for those things. And the last one that I want to talk about is Piktochart. Again, this is very similar to the suggestion of using Canva for a timeline. This isn't intended to make timelines, just like Prezi is not intended to make timelines. And that's what kind of sets it apart from the Time Toast and the Tiki-Taki, which are meant to be used as timelines. So in with that, there's some benefits because there's a little bit of flexibility when you're not strapped within the parameters of something that's meant to be linear. The way that I was talking with Prezi, it can be nonlinear if you want it to be, or at least if you want to get started that way. So the reason that I really liked using this for a timeline and that I chose it was because the whole point of this one was to become something that we printed and we put out as a library display in the library. We wanted something that would catch people's attention. But this was in a space where we did not have a screen, we didn't have a way to bring something in that was going to be just streamed or that somebody could click on. We knew that it was going to be part of a book display, so this was a print display. And I needed to be able to make something that looked nice, but that I knew I could control the way it was going to print and that it would print well. So it wasn't just going to be a screen capture that might end up being pixelated depending on how large I printed this. And the picture of this one from the display that we use, it was, it's pretty big. These are sign holders that are meant for 8 by 10, and we laid them out. I will say that with using it, another great thing about it was that since it exports so nicely, I was able to string the final files together and export it as JPEGs. And I could use that as a single image. And again, I could use that on social media, put it in the blog, we could print it in an article that we've got coming out. So we were able to get a lot of mileage out of this one. None of these were done completely by one person. As you heard with the clinic events, even with our time toasts, a lot of those, there has been a lot of individuals in gathering the information and putting it into another format that was easy for another person to put into a timeline. So Sharon with the tributes, that's a great example of doing that work, having it in a guide, and that makes it easy for she and I to both go into Time Toast, and there's a way that you can have a group in Time Toast so multiple people can work on a timeline together. And that way, she could paste in the information, or I could just pull from her LibGuide and put that information in. And then we could go in as we find titles or book covers that were by a certain scholar, or even photographs of a person. As stuff comes to us, we can enrich it over time. And that way, it's not just on one person. It's not such a burden for somebody to only be the one to go in and update these things. That's another thing that I really, really love about Tiki-Taki. Even though I'm the only one that's gotten in at this moment, it has the capability for other users to get in and work on that. And recently, just in the past year, we've done the same thing with Piktochart. We now have a team account. And so that's been a great way for me to create something like that timeline, and I can share it with other team members. Even if they don't use it right now, they'll be able to get back to it in the future if they want to go in and update it and then reuse it again next year, and there's something to add to the timeline. So I also want to say, just as far as collaborating, making an idea known goes a long way. That's how our legal history of witchcraft came about. I noticed one of our books in our little special collections area of books, and it was like the legal history of witchcraft. It was just a beautiful book, right? It was one of those books that you walk by and you wanted to touch it and like take it home and put it like way up high on your mantle. It was just so beautiful. And I thought, surely we have some other books like that. And I said it out loud, and Sharon heard me, and another colleague heard me, and they were like, ooh, I know where those books are. And so over the course of a month or so, without really meaning to, we had gathered an entire display, and we had the makings of, this sort of legal history. And so we thought, well, it's kind of a dead time. We don't have another thing to put out, so let's just, share it with people. And that was, just making it known. I would say also with our clinic event, it kind of happened organically that way too. They knew they had an event, they wanted to celebrate it, and we kind of all came together and said, well, what could we do? We started talking about all the different things that we had. She said, I've got this history book, and I got some photos, and I know this guy I can get a photo from, and before we knew it, we had more than we could handle. So.
I know a guy.
And part of that also, which was why I was so grateful to the law library folks, is that our initial plans, we had the dean sign off, this is being recorded, but he signed off on this huge continuing legal education event. We advertised it in the fall, and then right when it was time, I got a word, oh no continuing legal education event. We had invited all these dignitaries. It was, we were halfway down the road on a CLE attached to our law clinics at 50 as the way to get people back, and that couldn't happen. And so then and what happened wound up being even better and a lot more fun than going to a continuing legal education event at the end of the day. But it was one of those, okay, I'm stuck because I didn't have the plan B in mind yet. And yes, just going and asking for help and just trying to stay positive and not have people who plan the speakers and all of that kill me in the meantime and say this is going to be even better. and it really was. But yeah, sometimes you just have to be nimble and shift gears as priorities change, and having something like this was a wonderful, wonderful way to, even better.
I will say in that event, obviously we needed a new timeline. And in some of the others that are for specific people, we needed a new timeline. There's some cases where a timeline would be really cool to include, but maybe it already exists. So before I ever create a timeline, there's other examples that we've done of similar to the other display that I talked about, where timelines already existed, and I searched for a free infographic, and a lot of times one is made that's beautiful, and I think I don't need to waste my time doing this, it exists. I'll also say that as far as recycling and reusing things, one of the reasons why I really do like Prezi is because it's one of those platforms where there's a lot of things that exist and you can search what exists and people have shared it with everyone already. And even if you don't use it as is, you can copy, and it's a good starting point. So I would encourage you to check out what exists before you commit a lot of time to something, particularly a very time-consuming project in Tiki-Taki. It will be worthwhile, but just check what's out there first. And keep it in mind so that you can use it later. One of the reasons why I put the things on the handout that I did and laid out sort of a little place to jot down ideas for you was because I really think that your initial purpose will go a long way, your initial audience, in determining which platform's going to serve you better, at least at first. I mean, all of these are going to get you further than just one use, but you know, we knew a live event would do well with something interactive. We know that a guide does really well with something embedded. And so those are good starting points for deciding which one to use if you're trying to figure that out. And what would you guys like to see demoed? I can activate this poll as well. Let's go to the next one. I'm kind of feeling like, based on what has been said, and we got the most questions during Tiki-Taki, that perhaps that's the one to show. Is that how you guys are feeling? Let's see what these, what my results will tell me. We'll go back and go to the next one. Looks like Tiki-Taki is way up there. And that's what we'll do for the remainder of our time, since we're getting close to the end. So I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go with Tiki-Taki. All right. I will log in and show you. So you've seen what it looks like. This is where it all begins. A tiny little box in the top right-hand corner. It's going to kind of continue on that way. This is one case where being able to enlarge your browser repeatedly might work really well for you. Honestly, that's really the only negative thing that I have to say about it. Make sure I can get in here. Oh, please. I have too many passwords to keep track. I'm sure I'll get in, you guys. While we're waiting, check out I'll go to the next poll so that you have that to do as well. And so our next poll is a fun one. It's what's your Timelord name? I'll put up, while I'm looking at this, actually, I can pull up the Timelord name and figure out my password on my other end here. This is what we want to show you. We want to thank you for being here, and we would love for you to have fun figuring out your name and let us know. And the results are going to show up in a word cloud as to what your stuff is. So,
I do not like my Timelord name. Rand Saint, it doesn't say anything.
while I pull up my.
No, I think yours is pretty good. It's better than Professor Zenark.
We've got Professor, it's either Lord Cosmos or Professor Cosmos coming up in the results here. Those are pretty cool ones.
Yeah.
Search. here we go. This is gonna show my. Yeah, let's make sure let me log in here to make sure it works before I reveal it to everyone. Yes. All right, we'll go back out. Let's go to the next one and see what it's looking like for you. These are the results of what we've got.
That sounds like someone that works for Disney World though, at Dimension.
And I will get in here the right way. So, of course, it's one of the few things that isn't an email address. All right. This is what it looks like when you log in. So this is what I mean by what you see in the top corner. That's it. That's the space you've got to work with. But it gives you good results. So, and here we go, CSV. I think that might be the answer to the question. So back up your timeline's content by exporting your stories in a CSV format. So there you go. Yeah, you have a question?
No, I was just like,
Oh, yeah.
CSV,
Yeah.
Is
win.
this the best one you've found for a lot of entries?
So far. So the maximum entries that we have on the account that this is right now per timeline, I think it's 250, which is a lot. Time Toast, I can't remember the limit, but it's not that many. My other comparison between this and Time Toast, when you're thinking of something that's specific to a timeline, is again that color categorizing. That's so helpful when you start putting. We didn't know if we would have more than 20 at first, and then very quickly we hit 70. And it was like, this is getting a little difficult to look at, and for people to interact with it and not get lost, So, yes, this by far is the best one for the majority entries. Now, that's from the user end. Of course, from this back end of putting things in, it's putting in, 200, 250 entries this way in this very limited format is difficult. So you have this tiny scroll here where you can scroll down. This is all the entries, and this is all you get for, kind of searching those entries. When you want to edit one, this is the space that you have to work with. And again, this is where the bulk of the content is for you to scroll through. So that's why I was saying it's really good to have that stuff edited before you do the pasting.
And yeah.
Is there any way of doing a CSV import?
I don't know. It's a great question. Another thing that I need to discover.
Download it and see what the headers are.
And then you
Yeah.
have another question.
Yeah.
So I think this is the one that allows you to attach media.
Mhm.
Is it the only one that does that?
So far that I've found.
Okay. Can you, what kinds of media formats can you upload to it?
So Time Toast will allow you to pull in images. You can upload images and link to images. The drawback with Tiki Talkie, it's sort of you win some, you lose some. You can definitely use any kind of media. You can do video, you can do audio, you can do photos. The other great thing is it's not limited to one photo, but you can have like a photo slideshow. And that's something that I have not found in other timelines. The drawback is that they are not uploaded to Tiki Talkie. So with Time Toast, you can upload a file. With Tiki Talkie, you have to copy and paste in, and it must be hosted somewhere else. So there's that.
Someone's posted a Python coding in GitHub on the CSV.tki
Ah.
conversion. If you speak any of that, which I don't, but I know some of you do.
Trying to learn. So here's your basic info. This is what pulls an item in for you. Media, this is where it allows you, I can show you, this is what it gives you to add that media. So as you can see, you're not limited to one image. You can click add media to have more than one image there. You can have extra info and paste in more text, but that box never gets bigger. It just gives you another little scroll bar to work with. So those are the major drawbacks. Up here in your settings, that's where you can put the main information, that overall information for your timeline, and the start date, end date, and even how much it zooms in and out can kind of default be set right here. So if you want people to kind of see it all at once when they go to it, you can do that. See, one more thing. There's the 3D settings if you wanted to get into that. And then lastly, that's where your categories live, so that you can create those and assign them a color and those kinds of things.
Did you ever hit a character limit?
I have not. There is a character limit with the titles. I can't remember what
Right,
that
I
was.
missed the
Oh.
scroll box, like, because,
I did not with, where was the story? Let me go back to the story. You're talking about with the story, is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
We had some rich ones.
we
they
did.
seem very detailed, which is great, you
See
know.
if I can find one that was very, very long. I mean, this one from Elizabeth Grant was pretty long. Let's go away from that and look at more here. So this was a pretty lengthy one, and you've got your title, which does have a limit. It will not go more than, I think it's 2 lines. So I did have to adjust some titles to trim those down so that a title would fit. And this little intro has a limit. But as far as I can tell, I have not reached the maximum for the more info section, which is that lighter colored text where I put more in there.
And can you format the text? Like, does it copy paste easily, or you have to do, yeah, okay.
There's not a lot of formatting in there. Not at all. There aren't any tools in there to format. Now, I didn't have the time or the energy to go in and see if I could, put in bolds and do it, if it would accept some code, and perhaps it would. But it doesn't have any tools built into its interface.
So like a blue book citation would just not, it's not gonna work.
Yeah. It does allow you to click through. The other thing I like about it is that it's interactive in that, you can scroll through here. Some of our articles I can show you, it will jump you out. Here's an advocate. Where's a good advocate article? Learn by doing. Let's check this one out. You can click find out more, and I have linked these back to our institutional repository for the articles. So that's another great way to just keep that pattern going. So you're driving people to your resources, and your resources are driving people back to these tools, and it can just, spin around. Mm-hmm.
It looks like it limits you to how many times it can be viewed if you've embedded it. Are you able to maximize that number? Or is that a hard limit? What happens when you reach it, if you know?
I'm not sure. Actually, at this point, we have not, because there's a limit, we have not embedded it yet. So this is one where I have done some screen captures, and I'm feeding that by doing a nice screen capture exactly the way I want people to see it, and it hyperlinks to the full experience. I've also done some, again, the main purpose for this one was a live event. So we had it blown up full screen, just as you saw it a moment ago. So we're not embedding it yet, because there is that limit. So that would be another thing to consider. Yeah. I think we've got 2 more minutes. Does anybody have any other questions for myself or the other panelists as far as any of the platforms or any of the things that we've talked about?
You came to a link, I missed however you got to this.
Oh, yeah.
Did you actually embed a link to a file, or is it a download?
So this
one
is a link that is in the settings for a particular story. When you go to edit, it's this link right here.
Oh, okay.
You can assign it a category or not, and then you can give it a link or not. And whatever link you put in shows up as a find, find more, find out more. Let's check it out, see what it says. This one doesn't have one, let's go to another one. There we go, so find out more. It'll just say that by default. You may be able to change that in settings as well, I haven't
So
explored
is there a
that.
free version of Tiki-Taki, or is it only the paid?
There is a free version. I started this in the free version. The only drawback that I had in the free version was I couldn't collaborate. I didn't need to do that. So far, I haven't needed to do that yet, but you were limited by the number of stories that you could have, but ours hadn't reached that limit yet. So when we upgraded, of course, that increased, and that was good.
Yeah.
It also has advertisements. So what you're not seeing is in the free version, that bottom strip here had a bunch of those like flashing GIF advertisements. So that was actually the thing where we said, this looks great, we want it full screen at a big event where a lot of alums are gonna come. We need those ads removed. And that's how I was able to get all the extra goodies in the upgrade approved.
Did you say how much it was? I don't.
I feel like I put it on your handouts.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
$750 a month.
Yeah, so the prices, at least